Response. I'm Kristen Miller Zohn. I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Lauren Rogers Museum in Laurel, Mississippi, and I'm so thrilled to be with you all today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here to celebrate the exhibition Identity and Response, which is up in our galleries through the summer. And it is an exhibition of work by African-American artists over the last 80 years that is from our permanent collection, but then also from Michael Ross's private collection and also from his own work. Michael Ross is an artist who's originally from Laurel and after living around the country has returned home. And we have asked him to put together this exhibition for us. And so Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the impetus of choosing the work that you chose, how you thought about how those things went together with things from our permanent collection and kind of how you decided the show should be hung as well?
Yes, thank you, Kristen. It's very exciting to be here. I was looking at the work. I was looking at the work in the permanent collection there at the museum, and I kept thinking about art being in dialogue, art pieces being in dialogue with each other. And I wanted to show that sort of idea because even also when I've been in group shows, sometimes it's been remarkable how we've all commented, the other artists, about how the work can dialogue with the work dialogues, even when we are not present. And I saw the opportunity for that to happen definitely with the works in the permanent collection at the Lauren Rogers and the work that I have in my own collection, which is most of the artists who are present today are artists who have done work that is in my personal collection. And so that was the impetus of it, the thinking about that and thinking about we have all African-American artists. And so my thought about identity, and that's a broad thing. It's a broad term, it's a broad concept. But I thought about each of these works in dialogue, responding to each other. I also thought about that when we are doing work, we're often responding to something, perhaps the world around us, perhaps our own thoughts and things like that. So that is basically what prompted me to do this particular type of show and this particular title for the show.
Thank you, Michael. So we're going to talk more at length about each of the artist's works and how it fits into the theme of the show. But before that, we're going to go around the room and have everybody introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from and where you live now, and just a basic overview about your art and art making.
Yeah, so I grew up here in Laurel, Mississippi, and I started to study art when I was first able to study art in junior high school. And so I studied art here in junior college, and I studied art in Mississippi for a university. And then I went to graduate school in the Chicago area, Northern Illinois University. And from there, I moved to California and lived in the city of San Francisco for 25 plus years. And now I moved back to Laurel, as I like to say to myself, I moved forward to Laurel. So that's where I am now, and my work is mainly I concentrate on drawings and paintings, although I do work in fabric and quilting and wood carving, all those things. But I do think of myself primarily as a painter and one who draws.
I am in San Francisco currently, and I moved here in 1982 from the East Coast. I originally grew up in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And my background is actually architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design with a strong interest in photography. So I'm self-taught. And originally I was using a camera to actually take photographs and document things that I was seeing. And then about 20 years ago, I stopped using a camera and started creating images that are called photograms. And those are images that are created by laying objects directly on top of photo paper and exposing it to light, and you get a white silhouette of that object. And I look at the human figure and talking about the African diaspora, and I also look at nature. because nature can tell the complete story from the beginning of creation until death. And that allows me to sort of broaden the topic about life. The work that's in the show, it's me taking two different photograms and collaging them. So I'm starting to play with different tools, crossing analog photography with computer work, and then also adding color.
My name is Mark Harris. I was born in Durham, North Carolina, and grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Spent most of my adult life there. I currently live in San Francisco, California, for the past 20 years. And I am a self-taught artist since the age of 7. My work currently primarily focuses on social commentary and trying to raise consciousness around issues that are important to me, such as police violence against African Americans, gun violence in general, and systemic racism. I work primarily in collage and mixed media on wood panels. So my work that's currently in this exhibit is from a style I was painting in probably 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm a little bit of a self-taught artist as well, but I did go to school. I met Michael Ross actually at NIU, Northern Illinois University. We both were working on our master's program. And after that, Michael pretty much convinced me to move to San Francisco, where that particular piece that's in the exhibit, he and I actually kind of traded, but he fell in love with that piece. And Fire and Water, it's mixed media. I was actually treating my canvases with sand at the time and using acrylic paint and putting various objects on my canvases, but that particular piece has one stone in it. So I've pretty much evolved from there. I now do more art that's more spiritual, organic. Behind me is a piece where now I'm doing found objects. So I'm creating a certain pull from collected pieces. I still do two-dimensional works, but I do believe in still adding that spirituality towards it, into it. I, just grow each and every time I do a piece. So I'm currently living in Atlanta. I've been here now for 16 years, but I was born and raised in Ohio. And people say, well, how did you get from California to Ohio to Georgia? But my parents originally are from Georgia. So, I kind of pretty much came back to my roots, so to speak, because here I find my creativity gets more and more heightened, especially when I'm around, the ancestors and my family and whatnot. So I'm very thrilled to be in this show. It's very nice.
Hi, so my name is William Rhodes. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, but I've been in San Francisco for more than 13 years. And I am a trained artist. I went to school in Philadelphia, University Arts, and then made my way into University of Massachusetts. My work pretty much, I would say, reflects different phases in my life. A lot of the pieces, like the pieces that Michael had interest in and collected of my works, they had a strong focus on astrology. So a lot of times I've been studying astrology for quite a while, and it finds its way into my work. And currently, a lot of my work has connections with the ancestors and also a lot of sculptural elements too that I use. And I also have training as a furniture maker. So from time to time, I bring those elements together in a lot of the work.
My name's Kristine Mays. I'm from San Francisco, California. I was born and raised here. I've pretty much been an artist since I was about 5 years old. I've always been self-taught and I've taken a few classes here and there that has just been a part of refining what I do. But in general, the work that I make is all from experimentation. And the work that Michael has that's been included in the exhibit is a piece that's from a time frame in which I was looking at the roles of women, specifically around the time period of like the 50s, and just the way in which women were perceived as ladies and had a certain proper aspect to how they presented themselves. And then my work at this point is more about women in society and has more of a social consciousness to it, and more of a speaks more to humanity and what's happening in the world. And so yeah, I mean, I'm just really excited to be a part of this, and I'm definitely among a great group of people, so thank you for having me.
Hello. Yes, my name is Virginia Jourdan. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California. I am presently living across the bay in Richmond, California. I studied art at the University of Washington, and I had the privilege of working with Jacob Lawrence, who was teaching at that particular time. I also studied at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, majored in illustration. So I also illustrate children's books as well as being an exhibiting artist. I am also an art educator. So I teach from elementary school to high school, and also work with a nonprofit organization called Art with Elders, where we go to healthcare facilities and teach elders there. But because of the pandemic, everything has been virtual, which has worked out pretty well also. A little bit of a disadvantage for the elders, though, but we've been able to work it out with some of the facilities. So I found that there is about 4 different styles that I work in. I'm also a portrait artist. So the piece that is in the show is a portrait of my mother. And that was during a time when she was dying. She actually passed away 6 months after I painted that picture. But I took her down the street for a walk just to get some fresh air. And she just stood at the end of the block and just stared up the street. And so I took a picture of her and I painted that. So I kind of just, I like to paint the soul of people. So I captured that moment, and Michael purchased one of the prints of the original painting. So the other style that I like to do is using Black silhouettes. As a matter of fact, you can see some behind me where, because for me, it just exhibits such a powerful figure. The color Black symbolizes a lot of things, strength, sophistication, power. And so that's what I kind of show in those, in that series. That series is a civil rights series. And in that series, I use a lot of Black silhouettes. I loved going to Ocean Beach in San Francisco. So that is where I get my peace of mind. So with everything that's happening right now with the police brutality, the COVID, the, you know, just the whole climate of things that's going on, I decided that I would start doing a series of paintings of the ocean so that it would take people from a lower frequency to a higher frequency. And because I love painting figures, it was very hard for me not to paint a figure in those ocean pieces. And when I didn't do it on the first one, it made it easier for me to do it on the other ones. And then I realized that the viewer becomes part of the artwork. So I just did an exhibit at Macy's department store in San Francisco. And so when people were looking at those ocean pictures, I was having a conversation with them and asking them what did they see in the paintings. And then that became part of the narrative of the painting. So I also use symbols, 3 symbols, the dove, the heart, and flowers. So the dove represents peace, the heart represents love, and the flowers represent happiness. So I was talking to this guy, he was telling me, he said, yeah, for me, the flowers represent harmony. And I was like, oh yeah, I like that. I like that. And so everybody had something that they were seeing in the pieces.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's going to kind of lead a discussion on the theme of the exhibition.
Thank you, Kristen. I want to take the opportunity to thank you, if I haven't had a chance to do that, thank you and thank the museum for inviting me to do this, inviting me to be a part of this show. And I'm really excited about that. And I want people to know that it's an extraordinary museum, and it's been an extraordinary experience to work with you all. So
thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor, Michael.
Thank you. So I had questions for all of you, but you all are so good that I think that you are heading us down that road anyway. I wanted to ask about, since this show is built on a theme of identity and response, that's always a tricky thing, identity, and I think it's a beautiful thing. However, and I wanted to see what you all had to say about it, each of you. Do you think in terms of, when you do your work, that when someone observes or sees or receives the work, do you want or not want your identity, parts of your identity, that could be very many things, parts of your identity to come through? Is that important to you? And I think that, yeah, I want to hear what you all have to say about that. If I could go, we could go one by one, the same. How about Mark? Would you respond to that?
Yes, a really great question. So I'll be as quick as I can. I think identity is very loaded, and I do think that people can determine what my identity is when they see my work, the work that I'm doing now. Maybe not the work that I have that's in the current exhibit, but for me, first and foremost, is I'm a human being, and my work centers around systemic racism. And I think that is kind of the crux of the issue, is that certain segments of our society aren't identified as being human, or less than human, or less than. So I would hope, from just an overall standpoint, that my work touches the humanity in anyone who sees it. And by that, I mean, they may get it and understand it, and it may make them uncomfortable, but that's part of being human. I guess the second part of your question that I didn't address, and just to be quick again, is that, you're talking about response. And a lot of what has happened over the last 7 years for me has been, responding to my own humanity, to what I've seen happening in my community, and trying to raise the consciousness of other people who are outside of my community, to get in touch with their humanity. Because what's happening is not, we aren't designed to live this way. We aren't designed to do these things to each other. And I believe that art is a really powerful tool that has a way. We everyone on this call has different ways of speaking, and they will reach people in different ways. My work isn't going to touch everybody. I understand that. But the people it does touch, that's who I'm interested in. And I'm interested in how they react to it. You know, like I said, I think you either have one or two reactions. I don't think there's a lot of middle ground. So my work switched from the work that you have, Michael, in your collection to this because of my connection with my own humanity and being really frustrated and outraged at what's happening in our country.
I wonder if, Ron, would you respond to that?
I don't think about my identity consciously when I'm doing the work. A lot of my work is done intuitively, and I might get an idea that just kind of pops up into my head and it's a response. So, you know, the work that's in the show, which you're looking at now, is called Can You See Me Now, Blue Moon? And that's me thinking about my ancestors and thinking about slaves who were trying to escape from the South. So the blue moon is of course a rare moon. It's not a full moon, and slaves like to escape at nighttime. That's when they prefer not to be seen. So you get this dark shadow that is very present, and then you also get the sense that they're using nature to hide behind, but we're also a part of nature. So there are different layers of meaning in this, and I don't think people necessarily will see the story that I started with. So I like people to bring their own perspective to the work. And they might see an interconnection between nature, because nature is very prominent, and also having that discussion about the environment that you're in. Of course, I'm thinking about the environment of the past. So that's one of the things. And you know, in other work where I've used myself, it's very difficult for people to tell if I'm male or female. So, and that happens occasionally when I start thinking about what does it feel like when a girl is jumping rope. You know, there's a lot of joy, there's a lot of freedom in that expression. And when you look at that piece, you don't see me, you see somebody else, but it also touches on my the feminine side of my life. So again, it goes back to the multiple layers that I'm talking about. You know, so my identity is in the work because I've created it, but it's also trying to elicit a response from the viewer to see what they think about the work.
Mm. Wow. Thank you, Ron. That's good. Letitia, I would ask that you tell us what you think about my question.
Well, as I was listening to the other artists too, for me, I started off being very much so an abstract artist. I followed a lot of Cubism, and just like anybody else, I was, you know, in school we were taught the Picassos and whatnot. So, but I always was attracted to shapes and colors. So when I really started to want to, you know, to pretty much bring a certain design to my works, I started to really pull from African masks. So I kind of would, you know, see a photograph or see an African mask in person, and then I kind of started to distort it a little bit. So when the pieces got done and I did have them, you know, on view or what have you, it was, so to me has been just the whole idea of art. And, you know, of course, identifying yourself is because a lot of the viewers were not aware of me being not only a woman, but a woman of color. So when my work was up and they were like, oh my God, I love it, it's great and whatever. And I would, you know, reveal that I'm the artist. It was dead silence because, you know, at some point, you know, who could actually do this, you know? a woman of color actually paints like this. So it really stuck with me on that because I studied my colors, I studied my shapes. And once again, I always revisited a lot of the African symbolisms and the cultures and, the African art period. So anyway, as I started to get more into imagery, such as the piece here, I started to do the whole thing of, because basically my works that I do are self-portraits. So let me just say that. I don't look at myself in the mirror, but, whenever I'm putting the brushstroke down or I'm starting a certain shape or design, I'm thinking about me spiritually. I'm thinking about, maybe life events, or maybe more so like life events and then the healing part of it. So when I did Fire and Water here, I was really getting to understand my subject matter as eyes closed or open. And this particular piece, I actually did water with the eyes open and then fire with the eyes closed. So I, worked on the whole, as you can see, is real like oval face. So the Dan mask was like my idea of, as I recall, doing this piece, because this piece was done like in what, 1990, I think, Michael?
Yes, I believe
it's got some age on it. And so anyway, but I, really wanted to get really bold with my colors. I also too was studying a lot of Mexican artists. I just, like I said, I love to play with shapes and colors. And then I texturize my canvases. So as I move through now, I want my work to be identified as, African-American, Black art, because we have struggled so long and so hard to get that, in the forefront. And I just, like I recall so many shows I was a part of where, it was downplayed a lot. And it took a moment for me to realize that. So then the piece behind me is a recycled, like kind of a tourist mask, but when I bought it, they had it as an African mask. But, right now I'm doing, twigs, once again, ancestral type of imagery, because I want to convey who I am, all the parts of me. So, but hopefully, it's not to say that, I really want to go in and say, hey, look, my art is Black. No, but I do want you to know that it is a part of me and that's who I am for sure. And that, I want everybody to pull from it, but most and foremost, spiritually, I want everybody to connect. But I'm connecting now, 100 with my ancestors. So, it's going to be that whole identity of who I am and who they are, and how I'm the conduit. And my art is actually what the visual part will be a part of. So
thank you.
Letitia, Ron wants to know, how does being in Atlanta influence your work?
Oh, well, a whole lot. Because like I said before, I actually came here because this is where my mother and father, this is their birthplace. So I was able to, I always go back and visit their town of Eatonton, Georgia, is where my parents were born and raised. And they moved to Ohio in the 50s. But I like to go back because it's still very country. I like to go back. I like to do the gardening. I like to see family. It's helping me identify who I am culturally too, because I come from a very diverse family. And it gets more and more diverse as I, dive into it and research it out. Because, sometimes with our creativity, we do want to know, where is it coming from? How's that language, how's it speaking through us? Because, we can say we were little, we picked up a pencil, we started drawing. Because my brothers and sisters always say, well, I can't do art, which they never really try. But for me, I'm like, ooh, this is it. So then as I do it and I talk to my elders, they would sit and say, hey, I used to make stick figures, or I used to do this, I used to do that. So being here has helped me to connect to that. And it's, it's my autobiography now. So
that's great. I just want to say real quickly, I used to go to Georgia every year during the summers when I was a kid from the age of 5 until 14.
Yeah.
So I still think about my ancestors in Georgia when I'm thinking about before time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very strong. It's very strong, Ron. And I'm the same way. That's what happened with us even though my parents, we were born and raised in Ohio, every summer for 3 months solid, we would come down here. And as we've gotten older now with some of my cousins, we laughed at that. But see, I still have that eccentric part of me. So when I go down there, like recently I went down there and was spray painting a bunch of masks that I found. And and I had them all lined up, and they were just so intrigued by that because they were like, okay, so this is what you do. And it was kind of great to talk and have that energy, brought about. So, but yeah, love it here actually.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Letitia. I have to say also that when I was still living in San Francisco, once when I was visiting Letitia, she took me to the country and the very place she's talking about, her relatives. And I was so happy, I was almost in tears. It just reminded me of my upbringing. Yes.
Yes.
So thank you, Letitia.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
So I think that I would like to ask William to respond to this particular question.
Yes, thank you. So I think maybe not consciously, I think about my identity in my work, but I can say that I guess it does come through because of, just my personality and how I use my work. My work, my art overall has kept me sane. And I know people hear that a lot, but I mean, literally, it keeps me sane. Through a lot of the trauma that I've experienced, insecurities, issues that I deal with, it kind of keeps me grounded. And the other aspect about my work is every piece, which a lot of people don't really understand. Most of my pieces have an astrology theme underneath it. And that sounds kind of confusing to some people because you look at the work on the surface and you're kind of like, how does astrology tie into that? But, for example, I study a lot of times different cycles that happen, in the world and in general, these cycles that repeat themselves over and over again. And when I see these cycles and these symbols, I try to incorporate that into the work. So I'll give one brief example. So there's a cycle called Neptune and Pisces, which was a big thing that came, and it happened. Now we're talking about 7 or 8 years it started, and it's going to run until 2025. And that was a cycle where the world was going to deal with issues around humanity. It was going to deal with issues of equality. It was going to deal with questioning all of these things. And the last time that the world had experienced Neptune and Pisces was right before the Civil War. So when I saw that coming, I knew immediately that we were going to have to deal with those issues. And I think Mark Harris, who's one of my friends who's right here on the panel right now, he may remember that we had a discussion that this Neptune and Pisces was happening. And the day that it hit, the first movie that was one of the big blockbuster movies was 12 Years a Slave. And it's so ironic because when it hit back in the 1800s, the best-selling book was Uncle Tom's Cabin and the documentary about the 12 Years a Slave.
Wow.
So this cycle repeats itself. So with all of this stuff that I read and all this insanity that I deal with, how do I translate that into my work? And that's what my work is about. So I have pieces which talk about slavery, talks about just a lot of those different issues. That's very current to me because that's what we're dealing with now, and we're going to continue until 2025. So that's the example of how there's underlying the astrology rides through all of this stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and these are just more examples of different pieces dealing with issues of humanity. Those were pieces that were created after I did interviews with homeless people in San Francisco. So again, in my mind, I'm thinking, so These are people that we overlook all the time, and we're not valuing them as humans or treating them in a certain light. So, but we have to deal with those issues. Again, Neptune and Pisces. So these sculptures are all kind of tying in with a lot of those issues. And these are portraits of seniors, African-American seniors, which to me are some of the most invisible people in San Francisco. How many people really take the time to really look at an African-American senior? They become invisible. And they have all of this knowledge. They're like walking libraries. But yet, if they're a library that nobody really wants to access, then how important is it? So I'm finding that they're extremely important. So with this work, I want to highlight these things and highlight these issues.
And I think it's really wonderful to so people know that the portraits that you have there with seniors, that they were actually painted on fabric and you quilted them into a large quilt. Am I right?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I must say, Michael Ross helped me with some of the work with the collaborations on quilts. Also, Kristine Mays at a certain point helped me with some of the sewing. So this was a community operation, and many of the quilts, I cannot take credit for sewing the quilts. I'm not gonna lie to you. If I was sewing the quilts, it would take me probably until I was 80. So I had a lot of seniors come together. I did the artwork, but the seniors came together and actually did the sewing of the quilts. And like I said, Michael Ross, Kristine Mays, these are people that helped me put these quilts together. So it is a community collaboration. So Michael mailed me bags of soil from Mississippi. The red soil and the darker brown, very dark brown soil. So I actually mix it together and create pigments with it, and also use it almost like as a crust for some of the pieces. So again, you know, my family has total Southern roots. So I wanted to find some way to bring that into the piece and really infuse it in the work. So a lot of the works have soil mixed in it. And people may see it as paint, but it's actually the soil from Mississippi in a lot of the works. Particularly the ones with the figures. Those are all coated with the soil, that red soil from Mississippi.
Yeah, how appropriate. So, thank you very much.
Thank
William.
you.
Michael,
Thanks.
can
Yes.
I interject something about William's quilt? So
Sure.
my uncle is one of the seniors that's featured in the quilt. And I just wanted to mention that William goes beyond the artwork. He calls these people. So my uncle always tells me, "Oh yeah, William called me," you know, and he calls him like every week. And it really it touches me because it makes my uncle feel really well.
Thank you.
It makes him feel good to get this connection, you know, especially being stuck in the house during this pandemic, because he pretty much lives alone and hasn't been able to really go to the center that much. So I would just like to say thank you to William for
Thank you.
going beyond the artwork and reaching out and really living what he paints.
Well, thank you. Mr. Oscar Reese, we have to give him credit. That's your uncle, who is an amazing addition to our community. So it's an honor to talk to him. And I mean that sincerely. But thank you for saying that.
Wow, this is quite amazing. Thank you, William and Virginia, for that. Excited about hearing from Kristine Mays. Would you talk to us and tell us what you have to say and what we have to see about your work and everything?
Definitely. Identity has been like a very strange thing for me as an artist. Originally, I did lots of drawings. I would do these drawings that were sort of portraits of people, and I always signed them K. Mays. And so for years, the assumption was always that it was a man that created the work. And when I would, I remember a couple of times installing work, and my brother was there. He was the one that was like helping me put up the work. And people would come in and they would immediately go to him and they would address him and talk to him about the work. And he'd have to tell them multiple times, like, no, it's my sister, she's right here. And they would still not fully receive that. So that was pretty interesting. So with the sculptures, it's still been, if the person doesn't see my name, there's an assumption at times that it's a male that has created the work. And the idea is always that when someone assumes that, they assume that it's a man looking at a woman through a male gaze. And so, which I struggle with that, because I struggle to understand fully just how they come to that conclusion. But but that's what has happened, occasionally in the past. And then now that my name is attached to it, it's sometimes they know that I'm a Black woman, and other times they don't know it. And it seems as if women who are also Black, they pick up on it faster than those who aren't, as far as identifying me as a Black woman making this work. And so in some ways, I mean, in either way, I don't know. I mean, it really depends on the circumstance and the setting as to whether or not it bothers me or doesn't bother me, or whether or not I even have any sort of take on the perspective of someone identifying me specifically. Sometimes I just want the work to be out there and to be experienced and taken in for the humanity that it speaks to.
Yeah.
And so in this case, the work that I've picked to show here all revolves around circumstances that I think definitely put me in a setting of being a Black woman. This piece that's being shown right now is called Four Souls of Birmingham, and it was made in memorial to the 4 little girls who died in the church bombing that set off the civil rights movement. And so there was no way not to look towards Black people and the history of Black people in America when viewing this piece. The piece that says "Say Her Name" is it was originally created without the words in it. It was a part of a series I called Precious Cargo, and it came out of this idea of women being exploited. And the original thought when I started creating this series was around like sex trafficking. But then as I looked at it further, I looked at all of the various ways in which women are exploited or viewed as commodities. And then the words were put into it, was sort of, the country was at the height of examining the Sandra Bland case and her unfortunate death, and or rather, more specifically, her murder. And then here in the Bay Area, we were dealing with Nia Wilson and this idea of grappling with this reality of a man walking up to her in the BART station, which is our transit station. A man walked up to a Black woman and basically sliced her throat. And so this specific piece became a part of a memorial that was like a public memorial where people came up and they adorned the piece with flowers. And it seemed eerily fitting because of the work having such, the chopped off legs and arms and at the neck. So in some ways, I mean, in that instance, my identity was out there front and center. And it's hard to always, I think one of the magical parts about being an artist is you don't know all the time, like where, what you are seeing earlier than most of the world, and how your work will, foreshadow things in some ways, or how the context of your work will change over time. So that's part of why I wanted to include this work. That piece is called Power Suit, and I created it with this idea of working women, and where the question that was in my mind was like, what is the place, and how does a woman navigate in the world as a businesswoman? And so Power Suit was created, and it had a quote from Shirley Chisholm that talked about like how, I'm really paraphrasing here, I should have written it down, but it was a quote that said something about how things are perceived, the most brilliant ideas are perceived differently when delivered by someone in a skirt. And so this piece was created, and at the time it really was met with sort of a silent acceptance. Like, it wasn't really, I mean, people thought it was a nice piece, but it seemed as if I got more attention from it when all of these women ran for office. And, to see these women take these higher positions in office, this piece sort of took upon like a different resurgence, and more people were inclined to share it, and just rejoice in it. And so I think my identity comes up over and over again, with regard to sharing the issues that are on the minds of women, and also sharing my Blackness. I mean, at this point right now, a lot of the work I'm creating has to do with placing Black people in settings they wouldn't normally be in. So I feel like even if I'm not physically there, my sculptures are in these settings that might be like so, for lack of better phrase, predominantly white. and yet, I mean, it's almost like a little inside joke to me when my work is placed there, since there's no physical features other than the gestures of the body that reveal there's no physical facial features or anything that you would say, oh, that's Black. The bodies pretty much give it away, and it's a thing where not everyone picks up on it. So that's where my sort of amusement and wonder comes into play.
Wow. I really like that idea. And if you don't mind, Kristine, I'd like to point out the piece that I have of yours that's in the show is a rather small piece. It's about 15 inches high, but I want to be sure people to know that if I'm correct, the other pieces that you're showing, I would call it life size, basically, right? It's really the scale
Right.
of the body. And so when you talk about the presence of the pieces there, they really do have a presence because they're generally the size of an actual human body.
That's correct. Actually, the beauty in the piece that you have is the fact that it is small. It's I only made, say, like 20 pieces that were this small.
Uh-huh.
And at the time it was out of this, here in San Francisco, everyone's living spaces are so compact that people kept saying like, oh, if only I had a small version of that. And so at one point I just made a series of small pieces that I called apartment friendly pieces. And so yeah, I mean, but in general, the pieces are life size.
Yes. And I'm quite happy that you made the apartment friendly one. So I get to be a part of your world of collectors. So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
Virginia, tell us about that question as well, and however you want to address that, Virginia.
Okay, to address the question, my identity is really about my brand, which is an emotional identity, which conveys compassion, empathy, and pretty much love. So in most of my pieces, you'll see the heart, where I am trying to spread the message that love is what's all that really matters. This piece is March to Selma,
Wow.
and I use gold leafing as well in some of my pieces. This one is my fourth style, where I love black and white photographs, and I have all these old photographs of family members, right? And so this is sort of a memorial piece for my sister who has passed away, and it's called I'll Fly Away. And this one is the song I'll Fly Away was a spiritual saying by slaves, where they talked about just a few more weary days, and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. And as you can see, the heart is in there, the symbol of the dove and the flowers. So that's just another style that I'm working in as well. And this is a sunset piece for the beach. Oh, so this is the piece when I had a conversation with a visitor. So when I was telling him that in my ocean scenes, I'm trying to go from a lower frequency to a higher frequency where there's clarity and there's peace. So when he looked at this and he looked at the bottom of the painting, he said, okay, so that's where all the confusion, that's where all the chaos is. And then when you come to the middle, he said, okay, and that's where you become clear, and that's where the clarity is. And then as you get up a little higher, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little white spot in the upper right where there's a dove. And he said, okay, and then that's the level, the higher frequency where you come to peace. Right. So when he was saying that, I was like, wow, this was it was really nice how there was an interaction with the viewer's narrative and my narrative. Right. So he was kind of asking me to tell him the whole story, but I gave him an introduction so that he could come in with his. So I said, okay, so what do you see? And then it was like we were connected. And that was a really good experience for me. But my identity, really, to break it down into a nutshell, is about love. Kristine, my question for you is, do you have any more of the apartment-friendly pieces?
Unfortunately, I don't. I've been doing, I just completed a series of work that was presented at a botanical garden, and they were really big life-size dancers. And so I've been, that's kind of spurred on other events. And so I've mostly been working really big and site specific.
Okay. Yeah. Are you going to make any more apartment size?
Well, when I do, I know who to call. So I'll definitely keep you in mind.
You hear it here. It's put out in the public now. Of course, what we've talked about today is one component of the exhibition. And we have our work in dialogue with other works from the permanent collection, works by Romeo Bearden, Elizabeth Catlett, Richmond Barthay, Huey Lee Smith, Kevin Cole, and Charlie Palmer, and Curly Raven Holton, Mo Brooker, and Jacob Lawrence. And so it's really, I think, exciting. And it's exciting how the work does dialogue. They do dialogue with each other. I believe that the work is not just there next to each other, but they do have, I would say, I keep saying dialogue, but that's what I mean, a dialogue, visual dialogue with each other.
We didn't get real specific with the labels in the show about what those connections are. And I think sometimes you can tell that there's a formal connection, i.e. it looks something about each of them looks the same way, or there's a certain silhouette that you're looking at, or a certain color palette, or a certain subject matter that's there. And so some of it you might get just outright, some of it you might get subliminally. And then also because we don't put out what those connections are necessarily, you can bring your own connections as a viewer when you see them. But if you want to hear about some of Michael's connections that he was making, there's a video that is also on our YouTube page. One of our visitors says, I have a comment on Kristine. Your sculpture impressed me and immediately drew me to Degas' ballet dancer. Such wonderful lines to celebrate the female physique. And also asked, a number of you spoke about the inspiration you have from the ancestors. What do some of you personally think about how the ancestors affect your work?
I had someone years ago, I was in a group show with someone who was a sculptor and from the East Bay. And he told me something about, he felt that whomever your work is done for, it will reach that audience, no matter how many years have passed, no matter if they don't speak the same language, no matter if it's on a different continent. And I was always intrigued by that. And I think I'll spend my whole life seeing if that's really how I could really embody that, but I do believe it. And I think the work is done for a lot of people, but sometimes when we have particular things that we're trying to say, it resonates with some people, and it may be people after we're gone, and it may, and so those things, for me, it makes me feel like a connection to the ancestors.
Yeah, I'd like to say a point about that, because you and I, Michael, have had conversations about this, and some of my earlier pieces that I didn't send, I used images from actual lynchings, and I was working on these pieces really late at night, and I was really I put a lot of thought into whether or not to do it. But something was telling me, I remember feeling like there was something telling me to use these images, because these people never got a chance to say, this was a sham, I didn't do this. So it was giving them a voice. But as you talked a little bit more, here are, 9 African-American artists on a phone call or a Zoom call about having our work in a museum in Laurel, Mississippi. So, I mean, if you think about that, I think all of our work speaks to our ancestors who weren't always able to express how they felt about their day-to-day lives, about being a woman, about being Black, about any of the stuff that they went through, not just the oppression of slavery, but just as human beings, falling in love, falling out of love, being broke, being rich, being cold or hungry. So I think, everything that all of us do in our practice every day, our ancestors are reveling in and enjoying the fact that we are giving voice. We're their wildest dreams.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that real quick because Mark, you said something really interesting. It just had a flash that one of the things that I'm doing, my aunt, who's 82, wrote an autobiography. And I've been using that as inspiration to tell the stories about my ancestors who I have no clue who they were. So I'm learning who they are, and I'm starting to express their stories in my photograms.
I appreciate that what you all said. And I think that, Mark, when you say that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, I've been thinking about a concept lately that perhaps our ancestor are our deepest memory as well. they are connected to us, and so that our memories perhaps go back and precede our own beings. And I don't know, but I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Yeah.
If I could add something to that, I would say that, well, first of all, like the comment about my work reminding the audience of dancers. I just finished this big show called Rich Soil, and it was made in honor of the ancestors, with this idea of like the ancestors rising up and dancing on this soil that they had toiled on for decades. And so I used a lot of inspiration from the Alvin Ailey dancers.
Mhm.
And I really thought that I really thought my internal wrestling was around really trying to give honor to the ancestors, and not necessarily knowing what specific, but rather just this big idea of ancestors. And then just there was this whole process of being on this land, and making the pieces for these specific sites, as far as these different gardens. At the time I was reading Alice Walker's book about women in the garden, and this luxury that women had to have now to carve out space for themselves. And how at the time, back when she was looking at her mother and her grandmother, all they really had were their moments toiling their little patches of land. That was like their silent joy in the midst of what they were dealing with, but it all still centered around providing for their families. And so it all just kind of came together because at some point during the holidays, I found out more information about my grandmother, and I was told that she had this little postage stamp dirt in the back of her house that she had turned into her own garden. And I remember when I heard that, it just brought about all of these tears, because I realized after making the work just how connected it was, and how I really did offer what my heart wanted to offer to the ancestors. So it does play a huge role in my thinking and in my reactions to things, and even in how I respond to the ideas that I get around creating.
Teresa says the last time that many of us were all together with Michael was at his farewell party at Ron's. It's quite moving to see this reunion through the bridge he's built between his two creative homes and families. A great day in Laurel. So this time has absolutely flown past. I feel so privileged to have been able to be with you all, especially in these days where we can't all be together. This is the most, as many artists as I've talked to at one time in over a year.
Well, for me, once again, I concur with what you're saying, Kristine. It's like, this is awesome to have this dialogue and to be once again a part of this exhibit. It has just brought so much joy to me, and obviously inspiration, because had it not happened, we just, I'm meeting new artists, and now I knew, I've met him previously, but the other artists I just, once again, it's awesome. And I hope we stay in contact, because I'm so inspired right now. It's just been fun. It's been a great time. And thank you so much. Thank you.
I want to echo that. Thank you so much, Michael and Kristen. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank both of you. I definitely would. And I'd like to thank Michael. I'd like to thank you, Michael, for seeing the value in our work and supporting us. That's very important.
Yes.
Because you saw the love in our work long before anything. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure all of us do.
Absolutely.
I thank you all, and I also thank Teresa for pointing that out, that about the farewell party. That's only something that we will remember, the ones of us here. And Letitia, I'll tell you about it.
We ate very well. I remember the food was good.
So I think that is really wonderful, to have the dialogue with you all and the work dialoguing together. And for each of you have actually helped me to understand how we can be, you know, each other's collectors, as well as those very important other collectors that are out there, but that we are right here. We're here, we see each other, and we know each other. And then we can live with each other's artwork around. And that's a particular experience that is also a wonderful experience, as well as that museum experience, which I love, you know, the museum experience. So definitely, thank you all. Thank all of you.
Hillary Steinwinder, our Curator of Education, just has something to say.
I just want to thank you all on behalf of the students in Laurel. I have been able to tour numerous classes actually through the exhibition, which is a feat in and of itself in the middle of quarantine to have schools within walkable distance of the museum that could come. But it's such a joy to me to see how your work speaks to children, but impacts them. We had a handful of kids leave after their tour and come back the next day because they wanted to keep sketching in the gallery in front of your artworks. So it just is such an amazing thing to see how the inspiration just continues and it works through the next generation. So thank you from an educator's perspective.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you also. I am so honored to be a part of this group, and it's so good to see everyone because I haven't seen everybody in a while. And Michael, you're looking good.
It's good to see all of you. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.